All right, welcome everybody to another author chat on SFF Addicts. And I'm very excited today to be joined by Chris Panatier. He's an artist and author of short stories and novels. His debut novel, The Phlebotomist, was released in 2020, and his sophomore novel, Stringers, is out today through Angry Robot Books. And Chris has also been a trial attorney for almost 2 decades, representing people who have been injured, poisoned, or killed due to the conduct of others. I'm very happy to have you here. How are you?
I really appreciate being here. Thank you so much, Adrian.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And first off, I want to thank Caroline Lamb and Desola Coker from Angry Robot for including me in the official book tour for Stringers. And I'm very excited to chat more about your new novel. But I also want to give a shout out to our mutual friend, Patricia A. Jackson, for originally connecting Chris and I. Apparently, she was under the impression that the two of us are just the right level of weird for each other, and that we should have a conversation. So thank you to her for that.
Well, if you read my book and still want to chat, then we probably are the right level of weird.
I read your book and wanted to chat more. So I think that's a good start.
Okay. That is.
Yeah. But before we get into deeper questions, I just want to congratulate you on the release of Stringers. So how do you feel about releasing book number 2?
Thank you a lot. I feel, on the one hand, I feel really excited about it, and nervous. It's interesting. It's like that book is coming out, and so for the past 6 months since I finished the last edits on it, I'm already on to the next thing. I'm trying to finish the next book so I have another deal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny. It's a grind, and it's a grind I like. I enjoy it and I appreciate it. But at the same time, like you make a deal for someone to buy your book, and that's the happiest you will be about that book. And then it's all downhill from there. And then you're just trying to get the next deal. Releasing it is super fun in the sense that I get to do stuff like this. It's a solitary, endeavor. My company is really people in coffee shops who I don't really know. Some I know, where I write sometimes.
Ambient
and then
friends, I guess.
Yeah, ambient friends. Like, we all kind of, I'm like, I've seen you before.
Yeah.
Would you help me if I needed help? Probably not. That's fair. um, and then doing things like this. And I love talking about writing. I love talking about books. So that aspect of it is really great. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited about Stringers coming out, but I've been working on the next book for 2 years. Even while I was writing Stringers, I was working on the next book.
Awesome. Well, if you have any hints about that, we'll get into it later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of this crazy limbo where you're just like in the future and you're in the past and present all at the same time, trying to promote the old book, working on the next thing, probably thinking of other ideas for future stuff at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's because you always want to keep the bank sort of full of
Mm-hmm.
ideas, and vet them as they come to you. You're always writing. I mean, it's cliche. Writers say that all the time, but it's true. Even now, in a book I'm working on now, I've rewritten it 3 times. Well, I've written it 3 times, not just revised it. The total rewrites, because I like the premise, but I'm always thinking about that. And finally, I think I've got it right where it needs to be. But even now, when I go to bed, when I finish reading whatever I'm reading, and I put my head to the pillow in the 1.5 minutes before I actually fall asleep, because I'm so exhausted, I'm thinking about, do I have any little problems that I want to solve? Do I want to change a name or mess with the title or whatever? So I'm always thinking about it. And it's like it's stressful, but it's I don't know of a job that doesn't have stress. So it's a job that I appreciate and enjoy. So I'll take that level of stress.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, we'll get into stress a little bit later. I was gonna say, man, you fall asleep in a minute and a half. Like, I wish I could fall asleep that quick. I even have like a 19-month-old, and I'm not that exhausted.
Yeah, it's a total. It's a blessing and a curse, right? I mean, my poor wife, she can lay there for hours and not be able to go to sleep. For me, I could lay down on the floor right here in my office and be asleep in probably 30 seconds. But the problem with that then is it's so hard. It truly is so hard for me to get reading done.
Right.
Because I start reading a book, whether it's in the morning, afternoon, night, and in 10 minutes my eyes are shutting. I'm just a sleepy person. And so and I have to do a lot of reading now,
Yeah.
including my own stuff.
Just falling asleep reading your own stuff, man. It's like my
Yeah.
wife is very similar. She doesn't read as much as she wants to just because of that. So
Yeah.
I got her a Kindle, and that's kind of been like a saving grace, because I think maybe like the weird brain trick that it's on a screen helps her to pay attention in a different way. But yeah, she falls asleep all the time. She's like, it's not that I hate it. I love the book or whatever, but I just fall asleep. Like, shit happens.
Yeah. I do the same thing. I do the same thing with the Kindle. I've got one that, is backlit.
Hmm.
And so I don't have to lean back under a light to read. I can sit on the floor and lean over it, and I'm less
Yeah.
likely to fall asleep. I will still fall asleep, but not as quickly as if I'm like sitting back in a chair.
It's an inevitability. It's an inevitability that you'll fall asleep.
Absolutely. It's going to happen.
Oh man. And before we get into your work, I wanted to ask you just about like your early relationship with SFF and reading, and how that was for you when you were younger.
Well, it's I know for a fact it's different than most people because I listen to tons of podcasts. I love listening to other writers and talking to other writers and all that. And most of the time they say I was reading and writing from a young age. I always knew I wanted to be a writer, or I always knew I wanted to write.
Hmm.
My story is completely different. I I always did art, and in college I knew I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I knew I wanted to be up in front of people and talking. So my early passion was being a trial lawyer. Um, I never planned on becoming a writer, and I didn't read like a writer is supposed to read. That came later, and so I had a lot of catching up to do. I started writing seriously, really at all, in the beginning of 2015. And up until then, but I read lots of, I really loved history of Native Americans. I read a bunch of that. I loved um, astrophysics, even though that's a loaded answer because it makes it sound like I understand astrophysics. I do not. I I'm so fascinated by it though
Yeah.
that I'm always like, I've got a Scientific American over there. I'll read the big peer-reviewed articles and I'll glean 5%
But
of what of
that 5% is enough to just like keep you fascinated and digging deeper.
totally,
Yeah.
totally. And really what happened to me was I know I really know the moment that I decided I wanted to try writing, and that was my wife and I saw our first movie together after our daughter was born, probably 10 months after she was born. We finally got out and saw a movie, and it was Interstellar. And I was just like, this is I was so it just hit me in the right way. Loving all the science and all the different concepts and everything, even though it does have a time loop fallacy in it, which we'll forgive. It's
We
such a
forgive you,
good,
Christopher. It's okay.
yeah, that's right. Chris Nolan, I forgive you.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that's the Christopher I was referring to.
yeah. Oh,
Not,
I know, I know. It was such a good movie. It just blew me away, and so I instantly went out. I started reading about it, and I read about Kip Thorne, who's an astrophysicist with Jet Propulsion Lab, and he was their consulting astrophysicist on this thing. And they wrote, I think, 2 peer-reviewed papers about modeling black holes because they had to do it. They had to do so much detail on that one black hole, Gargantua, I think they called it in the movie, that they legitimately had to do a bunch of original research in science. And I read
in
his
order to model it properly, as at least
correct.
to their satisfaction.
And by the way, when they actually got the picture of the black hole, um, Sagittarius A, at the center of our galaxy, like 2 years ago, it looks the same as the movie,
Yeah.
which is awesome. Um, and then I bought his book called The Science of Interstellar, and I read the whole thing. And after I read that, I was like, man, people should write books about space. Like, that people should do that, right? And I was like, I'm going to write books about space. I mean,
Yeah.
so naive, so stupid. And I was like, I was like, I don't know, I'll write a middle grade book. So I just like, there's something to be said for just running headlong into something without knowing anything. I learned a lot of really hard lessons by doing that, but I also learned really fast.
Yeah.
And so I sat down in January of 2015 and I just started writing. And I had this rough concept for a story. And um, I had to Google like how to do dialogue. I didn't know where the comma went or the quotation marks. That's how basic I was in writing. But it hooked me so hard, and I had a neat premise. I had a fun story. It hooked me so hard that from that day till today, I've written every single day. And my in that first run, I had a book in about 10 months. I had a first draft. And it was totally foolish. I thought it was middle grade. It wasn't. She was the wrong age. I thought it
how
was the
how
right
old
length.
how old was she?
So
Just
so kept changing her age because I thought that would get me in the right category. So
right.
like, you know, I thought it was middle grade. She was 12, which is a correct age for middle grade, but it was 98,000 words, which is like 3 times longer than you want it to be for a middle grade story. And I was just like looking around. I was like, well, some Rick Riordan stuff is longish and some J.K. Rowling stuff is longish. So this fits right between those classics, right? I was like, mine will be right there. It'll be right on the shelf with those two authors. And and I queried it to agents, but at the same time, I didn't have any illusions about the journey. I I knew that my writing was improving every day because I would go back and read stuff I'd written and be utterly disgusted by it and go, well, that must mean that I'm getting better.
Yeah.
And about a year and a half after I wrote it, I started querying it. Um, and I probably had 90 plus rejections for that. No, 80 something rejections for that one, with a few nibbles and a few requests for partials and stuff. But it was not right. It was there. It suffered in a lot of ways that I couldn't see at that point. And I wasn't super crushed when I got all those rejections because I had read enough by that point on different agent blogs and all of that, just about how hard it is and how rarely do you sign your first book. I kind of hoped I would, but at the same time, when I didn't, it didn't crush me. And I knew I had made a ton of progress at that point. And so that was sort of the first 2 years or so of writing. And only towards the tail end of that did I also start to get into short stories. But then I've talked a lot. Do you want me to
No,
stop
it's all
or to
good.
keep
I'm
going?
I'm
Okay.
fascinated. Keep rolling, bud.
Okay. Well, I'll get to the first book and then we can go from there.
Yep.
Um, so I really like that story, but then right after I kind of shelved it because I'd run through every agent that existed on the planet, and I came up with an idea for a story about a person who just knows a lot of stuff but doesn't know why, and I called that story Retro Being, and I wrote about 150 pages of that story, and it was starting to fizzle on me. And as it was starting to fizzle on me, I came up with the premise for the Phlebotomist. I put down Retro Being, and I wrote the Phlebotomist in like 2 months. Like
Wow.
the premise and the premise was super fun. And then once I got into the science, it just wrote itself. It absolutely wrote itself. I mean, segregated by blood type, there was an economy that was there. It all made sense. And it was just a breeze to write that first draft. I probably edited that for oh over a period of 4 or 5 months. I sent it out prematurely. Um, and I kind of knew it, but I was so like jacked about the second book. I kind of knew it. So I made another mistake, and it was one of those mistakes that I kind of knew I was making. Um, and I queried probably 70 agents or so on that one. Had more nibbles, um, more requests for fulls and stuff like that. But it was incomplete in a few key ways, and I shelved it. And then I was going to go back to the first book, the middle grade, so-called middle grade book, and rework it now.
Yeah.
And that's when I saw a tweet from Angry Robot on the very last day of May in 2018 that said that it was the last day for their open submissions period, where they'll take submissions from unagented authors. I kind of said, okay, screw it. I'll send the Phlebotomist. So I sent it, and a couple weeks later, they asked for the full. And then I went and I tried a lawsuit against Johnson and Johnson in New Jersey for 3 months. And when I came back home after the trial, I was sitting at the breakfast table, and I opened my junk mail in my Hotmail, and there was an offer to publish the book. So
Oh, so
they
cool.
and so that was really how it started. I very gingerly moved the email into my regular inbox so it wasn't
Oh, so
deleted
slowly.
forever. Oh my god, so slowly, so carefully, lots of screenshots,
Yeah.
and that's really how it started.
Man, that is so cool. Honestly, I had no idea. Yeah, Patty told me Patricia told me that you gone through the open submission thing, and um no, it's just like it's fascinating to hear how you jump back and forth between these different novels, and you got this middle grade, you got Stringers, which at that time retro being, and I like
Right.
Stringers way more. No
Yeah,
offense to
Stringers is
original title.
way easier to say too.
um no, but that's so cool. And I wanted to jump off of something that you said about the phlebotomist, how you sort of established this economy and social hierarchy based on blood, and that just kind of established itself really quickly, and you were able to write the book very very quickly as well. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your writing process, and just from reading your books I can tell you get really obsessive about peculiar subjects. We talked about astrophysics, but for the phlebotomist, we've got phlebotomy, which are is like the study and extraction of blood, and then blood itself, or vampires and vampire history. And then in Stringers you have even weirder shit like bug sex and watches and biology, and astrophysics comes back into play for that book. So how do you go about researching this stuff, and what's your kind of like research wormhole converted into actually writing like?
Yeah, that's a great question, because for me, it's I definitely know that a lot of writers, um, and setting aside sort of the nonfiction folks, um, there's a lot of writers who really want to get everything down before they start writing, and I'm just incapable of doing that. Now, I am now. I do try to, once I come up with an idea that hooks me, I do try to now, especially, hold off a little bit. I don't write much down. I just think about it and think about it, because I have made the mistake of diving in too quickly and just chasing. I don't know what the phrase is. Just chasing it and writing 100 pages, and then just going, it didn't go. It didn't happen. And now,
Yeah.
the current book I'm working on, which we could talk about later, that one I wrote 2 full times. And when I got to the end, I went, it doesn't work. And I was just trying to do too much. But so I am a pantser, with a general plot in mind. Um, and I can fall victim to making things over complex and then having my drafting process totally crumble like a
Hmm.
blancmange. And
That's very good imagery.
right. Um, and so with the phlebotomist, I thought, I had this idea. I was like, I went to bed angry one night because I was mad at the people who are running our country, and I was like, gave a $17 trillion tax cut to the people who simply do not need it. $17 trillion. And I went to sleep. And at this point, that day, I had probably been working on the book that eventually became Stringers. And I went to bed super pissed. And I just thought to myself, what a bunch of bloodsuckers, you know? And then I thought, wait a minute. What if throughout history, the absolute upper crust have always been bloodsuckers? What if they actually have always just been vampires?
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
And so right? And I was like, now that would be neat if it was totally hidden, right? How would they do it? So the last thing I wanted to do was write a vampire book. There were 1 million vampire books out. The market was totally saturated.
Yeah.
And it had to be a dystopia. So like dystopia, vampire, it's, those two categories were so saturated. But, they say don't write to trends. And I was writing against trend, frankly. And it was hard I didn't get an agent, right? I needed to get it sold to Angry Robot first before I was able to get an agent. And so it was a rough journey, but I really felt this book. I really felt this premise. And I was like, this is what I have to write. But I wanted to write it in a very unconventional way. I didn't want to tell a true vampire story that you've heard a million times. They're not even called vampires. They take great offense when you call them vampires in this book.
I love that. That's such a nice
right?
satirical touch of like, no, that is that
is not us.
A slur for us.
Yeah. And they break most of the rules, most of the vampire rules they break. Because I would tell you that they're not vampires. The only thing that makes them vampires is they live on blood, but that's it. Some people in reading the book, that rubbed them the wrong way. They're like, no, a vampire book is a vampire book. And I'm like, well, there's plenty, I did something a little bit different. But as soon as I started researching blood, I bought a laminated quick reference guide that like folded out from Amazon. And I figured that would be enough research.
No.
It wasn't. But I started learning then about compatibility and the different blood groups and all of that. And I was like, wait a minute, certain people are this, certain people are this. It's different percentages. Some blood can be used by everybody, some can't. And that pretty much wrote the economy that, if there's a government agency that's making people give blood, ostensibly in support of a war, and then because this upper crust has automated the whole society, there's no jobs. And so, the people want more money, they can sell more blood. And the value of that blood is dictated by its ability to be received by other people. So that created the different values for the different blood types, then the different social castes and the different neighborhoods. And and what are you going to get then? Well, you're going to get people trying to hack the system. So naturally, you're going to have these blood hackers that come into the story. And then I thought that the thing that really got it going was the morning after I came up to it, I was driving to work. And I thought, okay, who's my protagonist? I have this premise of the richest people being vampires all through history. Who's my protagonist? And of course, what did I do? I did exactly what you would expect a very, very green writer to do. I said, well, it's got to be a young woman or a young man or a young woman and a young man, and they learn how to shoot bow and arrows. And I was like, I was
the Hunger Games in Middle America.
Yes, exactly, right. I was totally trapped by what I saw, right? And at that time, I had only in the few years before that went, holy shit, I have not read enough in my life, and started playing catch up, and I'm still doing that today. That's been another sort of double-edged sword too, which I'll talk about in a minute. But so I'm going into work, and I went, no, the protagonist has to be someone on the inside that figures it out. And it's got to be a phlebotomist that takes the blood. And I thought, okay, who's that? And having gone to the doctor and stuff, and I just thought, okay, who do I think of when I think of a phlebotomist? And at my doctor's office, it's just these sweet older women. And I was like, that's my protagonist. It's
Yeah.
going to be a grandma.
Breaking
And
another convention, dude.
yeah, yeah. And boy, was that so much fun. It was so much fun to write a story with a protagonist that doesn't have to go through a training montage to become an expert. She already is an expert because of her life experience, and she gets to use it throughout.
But at the same time, it's like her training montage is more or less like um everything that she's confronted with that kind of like it's like the deconstruction of her world is the training
Correct.
montage that she goes through. And then the reconstruction as she figures out, oh fuck, this is really messed up. And then all the while it's like she's an old lady, so you have these really nice little details of like, she's got sore knees, she just wants to take a seat and chill, like things are too much right
Hmm.
now.
Yeah, and she doesn't tolerate any bullshit, like
Yeah.
and she's
Like any
exact.
respectable old lady, she's like, none of that young whippersnapper. Get out of here.
Yeah, no, exactly. And she's got her grandson she takes care of, and she's, kind of got him in shape. He's pretty well behaved, but he screws up a few times in the book in fairly big ways, but
Yeah.
in ways that you would expect a child to act. So it was so much fun to write that character and have a grandma as the main character in a dystopian kind of hero type story.
Yeah, and for me, it's like reading that book, it was such a surprise because I kinda went into it not really knowing what to expect, and sometimes I go into books without really reading the synopses or really having any idea, like, no
Yeah.
reviews, nothing. I had no idea it was a vampire book, and then once the pieces started coming together, I'm like, "Oh, yes, this is really cool," and then the conventions that you broke satisfied me even more, like, I'm on the complete opposite end of the spectrum of these people who are like, "Oh, that's not how vampires should be." I'm like, "Who cares what vampires
Right.
are in your conception of them?" Because this, to me, you explained how these pieces of this puzzle sort of fit together naturally. To me, it felt like a very poignant reflection of middle America and the way that I'm Canadian and I live in Ecuador, but I've visited America many, many times in my life, and Canada shares a lot of similarities to
Sure.
their neighbors down south. And it's like this is a reflection of, you know, middle of nowhere, small town kind of vibe, but there's still segregation and there's still the people
Right.
in the upper crust, as you mentioned, taking advantage of the people in the lower echelons of society, right? And blood just became this really perfect metaphor for the hierarchy of society and the way that people are abused and pushed aside. It's like, oh, if you're the wrong blood type, get out of here. Your blood's worthless, you know?
That I'm really glad that you kind of took that from it. I was not being real shy about being super on the nose in parts,
Yeah.
um, because I did want it. I did want some of those messages to hit very hard, and doing it, segregating society by blood, that instantly could put readers who are in great socioeconomic position, great societal position. You're people who have all the advantages, right? Um, doing it that way is something that they can actually go, oh shit, like I'm AB positive in this world. I'm at the absolute bottom. I'm living in abject poverty in this world, which is a cohesive system. That system is a cohesive system that is plausible. I mean, this is science fiction, but that there would be a event or something that would make some genetic factor that we have play a role in where we fell in society, to me was just a really good way of pulling people out of where they are now, and not having a rich versus poor, but having this genetic versus this genetic thing in a way that hadn't been dealt with. I mean, obviously genes have been dealt with, but
Yeah,
doing it in sort of a very simple way that everybody kind of understands. I think that everybody understands blood. Most people know their blood type. And so everyone reading it can empathize with the situation of the other people in the book, or go, whoo, like here I'm okay,
yeah, yeah.
but and then of course you get to the end and you realize there's an interesting reversal of how the blood works, which I didn't even anticipate. That's one of those things. I was pantsing it, and when I got into the world of the Iker wolves, I was like, holy shit, wait a minute. The AB positives in their world control everything because they don't need the machine.
Exactly.
And it was just such a cool revelation. So really, I have to credit science with co-writing this for me.
No, but that's the best thing about, like, research providing these jumping off points through which your creativity flourishes. So I love how it's like the dystopian factor of this world comes from segregation dictated by biology, genetics, and that comes naturally with the territory. But you used your research, everything that you were figuring out, these little light bulb moments, and launched off in directions that I felt were really satisfying. And then you have the Ichor wolves and the vampires, but all of that's tied to their history, their genealogy, but also the way that they're controlling the society through, like, what I viewed as like an Amazon type super corporation
Yeah.
who are using, things like fake news, misinformation, disinformation in order to manipulate their citizens into thinking like this is what's happening outside of your bubble. And it's like, oh, there's gray zones that we're supplying with blood, but it's like, no, the gray zones. I mean, I'm not going to spoil that because I think that's really cool, that little detail. But it's like all these little nooks and crannies of this world were just, um, to me, satisfyingly filled with blood, so to say, creative blood in a way. So
Yeah, well, and I mean, there were so many. As I got into it, it just branched out in so many different ways. You start to ask questions. Okay, you go, okay, what does this society do with people who have blood that can't be transfused? What do they do with them, right? And it's almost counterintuitive to what you would think. So what they do is they further segregate them, right? But that world kind of ends up flourishing,
exactly.
right?
It's like a little self-sustaining commune, and I fucking love that. It's just like that's where I want to live.
Yeah,
Not in like
right,
the not in the ghetto where like
right.
where the AB positives are living.
Yeah, yeah. And so it was interesting. There was a few things, so when Angry Robot took the book, my editor is named Gemma Creffield, and she also edited Stringers, and I absolutely love her. Because for the Phlebotomist, she just like got it. And I had turned in 72,000 words, which is short. And the book is still not long. It's not a super long book. It's like 325 pages or something, which is like imminently doable even for someone like me when I first started like actually reading fiction. That wouldn't be too long for old Chris. But we did a 2-hour Skype meeting where she went over her editor's letter with me and went through like 25 points that needed to be built on and fleshed out. And rather than asking me to cut like you usually hear, she said, she wanted about 100 more pages.
Hmm.
And I got probably 70 or 80 more, but that was really important to building out the world. And there were a few things where she was like, there's the revelation Willa has, and I won't spoil it, but the revelation Willa has with the lollipop. And I've become a very strong believer that in any story, especially science fiction, but really any story, you can solve any problem, and you could do it in a very cool, engaging way. The only factor is how much time you have to ruminate on it. And on that one, I really had to come up with, I wanted to come up with a completely nondescript trigger for her that she would know the second it happened that something was off.
Yeah.
And so I settled on sugar. And why sugar? Because it was needed for apheresis, for separating blood. And I had to do, I was literally just like Googling blood facts, and I was reading all these articles on separating blood and going, okay, there's got to be something that they can claim they don't have, but they do, like a component of a machine or something like that. And ultimately I was like, it's the coagulant, and then I had to go into what coagulants are and how they're made and all of
Yeah.
this.
But I love that because it's like this little detail. Obviously, you went into the research there, but lollipops for me are so emblematic of going to donate blood or going to the doctor or going
Yeah.
to the dentist. It's just like when you're a kid and you go to any one of those medical appointments, you walk out of there with a lollipop. And for me, that was
Yep.
just like, oh, it's so perfect because it's like it's a little bit from an adult perspective, especially for Willa as an older woman, it's a little bit like condescending to like receive a lollipop, or a little bit like, oh, okay. She has her grandson that she can give it to,
Right.
obviously, but it's like this childish treat that is given to this older woman, but it ends up being the trigger for her to figure out, lead down this rabbit hole of craziness that propels her through the rest of the novel. So it's perfect for me. It was like so
It's
emblematic of just the medical profession of, you know?
I love taking things that symbolize joy and happiness and making them as sinister as possible. And so I wanted to do that with the lollipop.
Sinister candy.
Yep.
Oh, I love that. And I want to transition. You've brought up how you were sort of balancing between like multiple projects before, what eventually became Stringers. You started before the Phlebotomist, and there was this back and forth and everything. But, once Phlebotomist was out and everything, and you went back to what became Stringers, what was that transition process like? And, you know, I know you started it before, so the idea was already seeded and blossomed at least a little bit. But a lot of people play it safe with their second book, and it seems like, from my perspective, you gave it a nice firm middle finger and just went some weirder direction. So, what was that process like after you finished the Phlebotomist and then transitioned back into Stringers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when you going back to your point about the sort of just not playing it safe, I've always had sort of the approach of an artist. Um, I'm a huge metal head, so what I love about metal bands is that you have a group of people that dedicate tons of time, tons of their own money to go play a show in front of 6 people and sing 27-minute songs about warlocks. And I just love that. I
It's
love
passion, man.
I
It's
love
pure
that
passion.
it is. It is pure passion. And I listen to so much of it that, they're singing songs about just like they're pushing the bounds as far out as they possibly can. And I want to approach my writing that way. So if there is a place where I can take it, I'm going to take it there. So long as it's still a cohesive story, so long as it doesn't lose the interest, so long as it's not a personal, I don't know, like just show off project. First of all, I don't have the chops to show off. So like whatever I put out, I'm just doing my best. um, and I hope that for the sake of the art, that I never feel like I can show off, because I feel like since I started late that I'm kind of playing from behind, and I actually like being in that position, because I will never get complacent. I will never get lazy or think, oh, this is just good enough now. Now I have the example of sort of, if you paint a room, you could paint a room that looks lovely and painted perfectly, but you can go up and look in the corners and you can see that there's still, the tip of a fingertip where they didn't reach in the corner. And so
Or like a stray hair that just landed in the
a
paint or
stray hair,
something.
that's right. And so I want to paint into the corners for every character I create, every title I come up with, every scene I write. I want to get absolutely everything out of that scenario, that scene, that character that I can. And sometimes that's just a matter of sitting there and writing a scene and going, well, this is fine, but can I turn this up in a way that still keeps it within the story, that doesn't go to the stupid, right? Doesn't go stupid. I love avant-garde work. I'm a big fan of a lot of avant-garde stuff, but I don't write avant-garde. Spec fiction is an avant-garde. So is it still within the bounds of the story that the reader expects, but just turned up? Did we get everything out of every scene, right? And so when I came back to what became Stringers, I don't think yet there's been a story that I've come back to that I thought, oh, I really wish I would have finished it then. Most of the time I look at it and I go, wow, I'm really glad I didn't finish it then, because I have a lot more to work with now as far as my skills and all of that than I did then. So I'm really glad that I'm hitting it now. And so what happened was Phlebotomist came out, and a month or so later, Angry Robot said, do you have any interest in letting us know what you want to write next? And I was like, you mean like a book? Like, you know,
An
and
email,
they're like,
Chris, an
yes.
email.
Yeah. And well, and they were like, yes, Chris, like a book. And so at that point, I went out and I was able to get an agent. And my agent is Hannah Ferguson, who's awesome. She really, really helped with this. And so we pitched. She asked me what I had on my shelf, and I told her some of the stories. And so we ended up pitching two. We pitched the first three chapters of what is now Stringers, and a synopsis, and then also a prequel for the Phlebotomist, the origin story of the Iker Wolves. And they picked Stringers for some obvious reasons, such as, like, the big one, which this is something I learned just being in the publishing industry now, is um, almost without fail, a sequel will sell half the copies as the original, no matter who's putting it out. That's just the drop off from book to book. And so it makes sense that most of the time they won't sign a debut author to a sequel right away. They may later. And so anyway, so they wanted Stringers, and my agent really helped me kind of bump it up in the beginning, with having Ben have a little bit more agency and making some bad choices. And
A lot of bad choices.
and in fact, I have her to thank, because for a big part of the story, which is the whole Earther Bro, what is it, 99 or something?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So Earther Bro, the web forum user who kind of catfishes Ben, I came up with that. I came up with the whole bounty hunter thing because my agent said, hey, stuff is just happening to him and he's got to be more involved. And I was like, okay, how do I make this guy make some bad choices? Well, instead of just having him be straight abducted, there needs to be a bounty hunter that finds him.
And
And so,
he needs to lure himself into that situation
and
like a
he
naive
does, right?
idiot.
And
Yeah.
he does. And frankly, what I really enjoyed about this one is, throughout this story, I tell you exactly what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time the characters are like, yeah, that's probably going to happen. But it's done in such a way that when it actually happens, you're like, what? That happened? So anyway, so I wrote Stringers in about six months. A little less than that, actually. I probably wrote it in I asked for 6 months. I probably wrote it in 3.5. It was really trucking along, and then I went through some revisions. But in the same way that I was still constantly researching the Phlebotomist as I was writing it, I did a lot of that for stringers, and not just all the science facts that Ben's brain is, churning up to him all the time. The hard part was coming up with. I knew there's another character named Naisha, and I knew that she was trying to build a faster than light drive, or a instantaneous travel drive, and I wanted to. I was like constantly researching plausible ways to do that I had not read before. And really, every faster than light system has been done. Every instantaneous traveling system has been done. And I spent hours and hours and hours. I'm dead serious, watching YouTube videos on entanglement and quantum computing and all of that, and learned the basics of entanglement, which I could not recite for you now. I learned them
It's
just
okay.
long enough to actually put a
Put them in the
version of
story.
entanglement in the story. And I invented sort of what's interesting is I was able to use this substance I had invented to explain stringers to also be the key to faster than light travel, which I had not planned for, but I had a revelation
Right.
one day. I was like, wait. This stuff should be the stuff that they use for faster than light. And then it just all came together.
Yeah, and it's perfect because that's actually something I wanted to talk about, your research rabbit hole in terms of quantum physics and string theory. I love how you give the more theoretical sides of quantum physics more of a digestible nature for readers. Like, it doesn't feel weighty, but the information is there just to the point where you feel satisfied knowing that the science seems plausible. And then on the flip side, you also tie in the search for a mystical object known as the chime, and the actual musicality of the universe, and tie that into the quantum physics and the string theory, when the theory itself is named after its you know metaphorical relation to the strings of music and the notes of music. So I love how you sort of tied those two things together.
Yeah, thanks. And it was no grand plan. As it just so happens that, as you're going along. In fact, I didn't have the title Stringers until near the end. It had a bunch of different titles, and it all just sort of I think subconsciously your brain is putting in all sorts of nuggets as you're writing, and later in the book you go, oh man, I need to go plant this thing earlier. I need to go set this thing up earlier, only to go back and look and go, I basically did it already.
Yeah.
It's kind of there. And the the music piece to it, you know, the stringers, for the people who are stringers, it is a literal string. Well, it's a theoretical string of consciousness. For you've got the instrument maker, who is this weird character that you just see intermittently, and you're probably reading it going, what the hell is this? Who is dealing with literal instruments. And then you have, of course, the chime itself, which in a way is an instrument as well. Um and it wasn't always called the chime. It wasn't until the end that I called it the chime. It was called the charm before that. The charm. Right? And now you could hear that and go, how could it ever be the charm? Like,
Yeah,
what the
yeah.
hell, right? Well, and I had
It's like, I'm
built it the
sorry, Chris,
same
but that
way.
sounds a little bit cheesy.
Right, exactly. Well, and that's another thing I'll say, which is, in the revision process is really where the bounds of your story has walls, and you start to see the things that are a little bit outside the wall. And that can be an action, a joke, uh, a name, just like with the chime. The charm didn't fit. It was the first name that I had thought of when I first started writing the book.
Yeah.
It just didn't fit anymore. There was a even though it's a humorous story, it's I want people to pee themselves a little bit when they read it, absolutely. But it's also dead fucking serious
Hmm.
in some very key ways. Like,
The stakes are enormous. Yeah.
yeah, the stakes are enormous, and it's enormous on a macro scale. And then for those little, like, there's some little vignettes that are in there that are extremely serious on a micro scale, and I wanted people to really feel that. And so I was constantly adjusting, going, am I taking you out of the story with this name or this character doing this or whatever? And that's why the revision process is so important.
Yeah, but you just hit on something that's really, stuck out for me, which is you do a great job of balancing humor, emotion, and action throughout the story. You know, from the sounds of it, it was both conscious and natural throughout the writing process. Kind of this like dichotomy of drafting versus revision, but then also what you're saying about like being able to see outside the walls and you know if I do this certain thing, am I pushing somebody outside the boundaries of this story, at least in terms of what they're going to connect with, what seems plausible to them. you know I was curious um how you approached humor specifically, because I think that is one of the things that kind of humanizes a lot of the story. You have the relationship between Ben and his best friend Patton, and also the struggles that they have in terms of their relationship, despite the fact that Patton is just like such a loyal friend and I love him so much, and his pickle
Yeah.
jar is beautiful. But then you also have different types of humor. You get the sarcasm of characters like Naisha or Aptat, but then you also decided to include footnotes throughout. And those footnotes for me felt like, if anyone is reading Stringers and not reading the footnotes, I feel like you're missing out on a little tiny window into Ben's head, and just these extra nuggets of humor and relatability relating back to his life on Earth, but then also into the present moment, with just these little drops of just condensed humor that I absolutely loved. And throughout the whole novel, they added and never took away from the scene, despite the fact that I literally had to move my eyes to a different part of the page. So I was curious how you went about tackling the humor, creating humor for different characters, but then also your decision to include the footnotes.
Well, so I knew setting out that I wanted this to be funny, and um, if there's if there's one thing that I've honed pretty much from throughout my whole life career, it's been cracking jokes.
It works in the courtroom, I imagine.
It absolutely does. Let me tell you, look, if it is the most underrated thing, if you can make a jury laugh, then you are well on your way to
Hmm.
winning that case. That's a fact if you can make them laugh. And to be genuine and self-deprecating if necessary, which I can do real well. Um, because I give myself so many opportunities
Yeah.
to screw up and then make fun of myself. But I the initial premise of this person who has all this knowledge in their head and they don't know why, they're just born with it, really lent itself to a funny story, because I was like, okay, well, if he's got all this knowledge, then it's always being churned up by his brain. It's always coming up at inopportune times. That also makes him isolated, right? So it has this sort of tragic side effect. He's got one friend in his whole life, and it's a guy who's basically got to be stoned all the time to be with him.
Yeah.
And but he's
Or
an
on
incredibly loyal,
psychedelics.
right? And I mean, and he, like, Patton does it all. But so again, when we talk about painting into the corners, I could have chosen anything for him to know, areas of knowledge for him to know. But I wanted them to do two things. I was like, well, if I'm going to make someone read this other dialogue that's happening, it's got to be entertaining. It's got to be engaging. And the best way to do that, frankly, I think, is just because it sets itself up as a funny situation, is to make what the guy knows just either utterly inane and stupid, which is like the wristwatches, or super funny, which is like bug sex facts. I mean, you just don't
Funny,
get any
funny and gross, depending on which bug it is
funny
and how
and
they
gross and
penetrate each other.
yes, and educational. Don't forget educational. So
Yes,
it's a
yes.
triple whammy, right?
Hmm.
And and I went in knowing, just like with the phlebotomist, knowing that like I was writing against trend. I went in knowing that some people are very anti footnote. I'm I'm like if it's done right, I like footnotes just
Exactly.
fine. And footnotes can be gratuitous and a waste of time. I think that's why most people don't like them outside of the academic sense where you just need
Yeah.
them to cite to, which I've done my whole life as an attorney, with lots of boring footnotes. But I thought, there's a way to make this fun and to turn these footnotes into one, just punchlines for what's happening in the thing, that this guy's brain is talking shit at him the whole time. His whole life, his brain is talking shit at him. And then two, every once in a while, he and his brain have an exchange in his brain where he fights back a little bit. And and some of them, it actually serves. I thought about it, and then myself and Gemma, my editor, thought about, well, okay, can we get around footnotes if we decide it's a big problem? Can we put the commentary of his brain in line? And it just didn't work. I
Yeah.
rewrote the first quarter of the book just as an experiment by putting it all in line. It absolutely didn't work. It had to be footnotes. So I explored every way to do this. It had to be footnotes because they are engaging with Ben and engaging with the reader. And there are absolutely places where, you know, it's a just a snap quick, funny punchline, or, there's one chapter that's all footnote,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And but there's a reason for it, right? And I thought that would also be a little bit of a poking fun at the whole footnote situation. There's like, one or two places where I kind of break the wall, right? Um, and but it was right for the story, in those one or two places. So with the footnotes, it was the best way to do it, and I was fully conscious that some people just have a prejudice against footnotes. But so far, most of like the early reviews I've seen, most of them have said, "Hey, the footnotes absolutely did not detract from the story," and
They add
and I
to it.
hope most people see it that way.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, it was like I said, it was like a little window into Ben's head, but that helped me empathize with him more. Like you said, it's like his brain is constantly shitting information on him, and it's like once I got through, I think there are some chapters earlier on where you have a lot more footnotes, especially when
Sure.
he's working at the fish tackle shop, like the fish supplies and everything like that. The footnotes gave me a moment to empathize with the fact that like this is what it feels like to be Ben because he's
Right.
bombarded by information, just absolutely bombarded over and over and over again. And like you said, it comes up at the most inopportune times, which later on, as I placed myself in this character's shoes, really grave stuff is happening. You said that
Yeah.
there's a lot of serious stuff at stake. And I put myself in his shoes, and all of a sudden I'm like, footnote. Oh, yes. What kind of shit is Ben's brain dumping on him at this moment when anybody else would be like, I have to be focused. I have to
Right.
focus on what's happening right now. But Ben's
Right.
brain is just like, I don't care. You know,
Yeah.
you're a stringer. Your brain is connected to other consciousnesses and deal with it, And then I get to read that
Yeah.
footnote and it adds an extra layer of humor, which I really love.
Well, and I also love a good surprise that's not just a surprise for a surprise sake, but is built into the story. And there are a few footnotes that, to me, still, there's one or two footnotes of Ben's that I read, and almost get choked up because there's some big pieces that happen later on. And yeah, you're right. Like the footnotes are most heavy in the beginning. And for anyone listening, there's only about 100 footnotes in the whole book. Most of them are pretty quick and dirty at the
Just
beginning.
like a one sentence kind of thing.
Yeah, and many are one word,
Yeah.
right? And they're just poor Ben getting smacked around by his brain. And he's of course the only POV that has the footnotes because his is first person, and so you're really getting a window into him. And even though there's other stringers, but you don't have the footnotes for them.
Yeah, but it fits for Ben, I think, just
Yeah,
because he's kind of like the, you know, in his sad position, he is the comedic center, the comedic irony of this whole book,
yeah,
and everything just kind of unfolds around him. So it felt right that he would be the main POV character and the footnotes would be applied to him. And yeah, for me, that was the first time I've seen footnotes in fiction done really well and used to such an effective end. So I was
thank you.
really,
Wow, thank
yeah,
you.
really surprised by that. It added a lot to me, and like you said, I can imagine if you rewrote the first third you said and put that stuff information into the paragraph itself or into the situation doesn't fit. Like it might just
Yeah.
ruin the flow. But the fact that it's a footnote, there's this little distillation in my brain of like, all right, I'm going to look down here. I know something's coming. There's the expectation of something that's going to add to the scene, but it's not necessarily breaking the rhythm of where I just came from. And then I can just boom, pop back into it and I'm off.
Yeah, in fact, sometimes I would hit 4 or 5 single word footnotes in a row where it's like this, and there was sort of a rhythm between Ben and his brain.
Yeah. Just the chaos of this poor man's mind.
Yeah, I know, right?
Oh man. Well, I want to divert a little bit from
Sure,
your writing and actually talk about your art. As an artist myself, when I found out that the Phlebotomist cover was actually designed, well, actually the illustration was done by you. I imagine you collaborated with them on the broader
sure.
design of it. First, I want to ask you, you know, you mentioned earlier that you've been drawing and making art for most of your life. What are your favorite mediums and techniques for creating art, and how did you come to kind of find your artistic style?
I probably found my style without knowing I found it because I was always fighting it, going, "Why doesn't my stuff look like that over there that I
Yeah.
really like?" And it just never did.
Yeah.
Um, I always considered myself an artist or artistic, but I didn't start getting serious about it until I was about 30. I again like on so much stuff, I got serious about things late because I stopped being lazy for one. Um, and so around 30, I was like, I want to draw some album covers. I didn't know any bands. I love bands. I love metal for one, but I was like, I'll just start drawing hypothetical album covers. And so I was drawing these hypothetical album covers, and I was putting them on DeviantArt and labeling them album cover. And it just so happened that there's a band in the UK called Desolated, and they found that piece. One of their members must have just like looked for album cover art. I don't know, and it
Metal
came
album
up.
cover, yeah.
Yeah, and so I did a cover for them, and then other people would see their covers and just word of mouth. And since like 2012 or something, at any given time, I've got one or two that I'm working on, including right now. Um, and that's about the right pace for me. I don't draw all day. There are some amazing artists that I follow on Instagram that I'm like, if I had the time to devote, I could be something closer to you.
Yeah.
I'm like, I have to look at them and I have to go, I can take inspiration from you. I will never be you. And that's the same for writing. And I have peace with that. But yeah, so I have been doing that for a while. I started with even before the album covers, I started with oil seriously, and did a lot of figurative stuff. There's one back there. It's like a woman on her side. It's kind of tough to see. And then there's that little guy right there. That's one. Um, but I really love oil. Oil on panel, on like a smooth panel, a
Yeah.
gesso board is my absolute favorite. I've done canvas and all that too, but that look is my favorite. And my all-time favorite artist for that is probably a fella. He's from Australia. His name is Jeremy Gades, and I've got some of his prints. I could never afford one of his originals. His stuff is utterly brilliant, and I absolutely love it. And I like Jenny Saville a lot. I like real painterly, brushy stuff when it comes to oil. And then pretty much all the stuff I've done for metal bands um, is pen and ink and watercolor. Watercolor, man, I mean, look, if you can do watercolor and get away with it, good for you. I mean, I do it and probably barely get away with it. Watercolor is the hardest medium there is,
It is
period.
really difficult,
Yeah,
but
right.
you found this really nice style where it's like you overlay your pen and ink on top of dot work as well, on top of
Yeah.
you know, watercolor as sort of like background a background wash and to give like depth to the piece. So I thought that was
Right.
really beautiful.
Thank you. Well, I've I've learned thin washes, thin washes, thin washes because once you go too dark in watercolor, you're done. There's no fixing it. Now, I've made the mistake a few times of going too dark in a small spot, and I can cheat my way out of it by mixing a really, really light gouache or something like that and painting it on and making it look like watercolor. But you can only cheat in very, very small areas with that.
Watercolor is
And yeah,
unforgiving.
totally, totally unforgiving.
Yeah.
And one of my pieces, I do a lot of gatefold album covers, so front and back with one
Yeah, yeah.
full story told across, and I draw them large so that when you shrink them down, they look really, really good.
Yeah.
And I draw them 14 inches by 28, and with a lot of really fine ink work. And I was watercoloring one, and I was straining to get the lid off of a tube of red, and I got it off, and it squirted across the whole piece. And it was probably 100 hours lost, and it was due in a few weeks. And so I went and got transparency paper. I traced it's like yellow.
Yeah.
I traced my whole design. Then I brought it over to a new piece, traced over the yellow transfer paper, pulled that up, then traced the yellow with pencil, then ink, then painted it all again. It was a nightmare, but
Oh, dude.
only luckily that's only happened once. But yeah, with
My heart just like broke, you know. I that I was a tattoo artist for 6 years, so
oh, awesome! I'm
yes, like
covered. That's awesome.
all this stuff back here, like tattoo
Oh,
designs and illustrations that I've done. But yeah, that just like that broke my heart to hear about your your watercolor accident because it's like,
oh man,
man, I know how difficult it is, like the effort that you put into an art piece, regardless of the medium. You know, for
yeah,
watercolors, unforgiving. Tattoos are definitely more unforgiving, and
yeah,
I'm gonna ask you about tattoos in a moment. But
yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you know, since you did collaborate with Angry Robot on the cover for the Phlebotomist, that's kind of a rare thing in the publishing industry. So I was curious how that experience went and like how that started and unfolded.
Well, I joke about this, but it happened because Gemma and Angry Robot are eminently patient with having an artist writer as one of their stable of writers, because of course I think I know how everything needs to look, right? And I'm I'm very conscious about that, and so I do hopefully know when to just kind of like tap the brakes and shut up. Because as it turns out, big surprise, I'm wrong a lot. Um, I had an idea for how the phlebotomist should look. I had a lot of ideas for how the phlebotomist should look, but when we went into it, I said, look, two things I really want. I want it to be hot pink because Willow Wallace's hair, she wears a hot pink wig. And I said, I want there to be some gold too, because gold plays a big part especially for the Ichor wolves. And immediately the style their designers went to was like a medical illustration style. And at first I didn't like it. At first I was like, no, because it had never been in my head. And as I sat on it for a few days, I was like, actually, I think this is perfect. This is really cool, for a lot of different reasons. And we went back and forth. There were a ton of different tries on the cover. And ultimately, Gemma sent me an email. And she was like, here it is. There's 3. You pick one. And there was one that was basically the cover we have now with like a stock image of a heart with flowers around it, and it was like it was a medical illustration. And I said, I really like this, but can I take a shot at drawing the heart and the flowers, because I wanted to have a little more detail, and I know I can do that. I know that's something I can do. And she said, yeah, sure, do whatever you want. And so that night, because I'm a total type A personality, I sat down and I did it on watercolor board with a nib and India ink, and sent it to them. The original, so like there's the cover. So the original actually had some more flowers there and some more. It was kind of more roundish. And again, like, I'm never going to presume to know exactly how something should look, because they were like, this is awesome, 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 but it's just a little too much, right? Why don't you take a shot at editing out some of the flowers to get a nicer composition? I did, and I love how it ended up turning
And then they
out.
also have room for a blurb and stuff like that too.
Yeah, they got room for a blurb. We even did some stuff for the back, some filigree, and it ended up not fitting the style. And they were like, we're not going to use the filigree on the back. And I was like, I totally agree with you. Like, I like how this is done. And if you look real close, there's a chrysalis right there.
Oh, dude. So
Right.
cool.
And yeah, there's a chrysalis in the story, and these are the same flowers that her daughter likes. So I got to personalize it to the story, which was really cool. And then, on Stringers, they were super cool. They were like, do you want to do little chapter illustrations? Do you want to do the cover and all this? And I was like, yeah, I'll try something, and I had in my head to paint a picture of the Time Lance, which is the big bad spaceship. And I did. I had a very clear image in my head of what this thing would look like. And I did, and I sent it. And Gemma wrote back and said, we've talked about it, and we just don't think it really conveys. It sends an image that this is just a regular science fiction story. It doesn't really tell us much else. And we went back and forth a bazillion times on this one. And ultimately, I basically built something in Keynote, like just with some, Google images and stuff. And I came up with a thing where it just had the name on the top and then all the letters kind of dragging down with like a star field in the background and like a bright green cover. And then
Again,
and I
with
was
the
like,
neon colors. I love that.
right. And I was like, this is what we should use. This is it. Let's just print this as the cover.
Yeah.
And then they were like, hold on. And they came up with the actual cover. And I was like, yes.
Which is very, very close to what you conceived. Yeah.
It's that. And I just absolutely love it. If you read the story, you know what this stuff is in the background. And they did this beautiful glossy on the title. And then this is the funniest part. I absolutely love this cover. I wouldn't have it any other way, which is why I love Angry Robots so much, because they do allow their authors to be involved in the cover process and stuff. I know other publishers do too, but having only experienced this one, I'm like, man, if I ever end up anywhere else putting a book out, I really hope to get the same level, but I'm not taking this for granted. But this is funny. So I painted this big, like, giant oil painting of the spaceship, and that's it right there.
They just condensed it all down to this tiny thing.
Yep. Yep. And you know what? It's perfect. It's
Yeah.
absolutely perfect. I love the little hint right
Mhm.
there. And this is what the cover needed to be. And they knew that it needed to be something other than just this spaceship. So
Yeah.
I can't say enough about interacting with them and working together with them and their designers. And their
Yeah.
designer is Kieran Tyler, who did this.
Yeah, and that sounds like the best form of collaboration, you know? Back in my time as a tattoo artist, collaboration was the name of the game, and it was really magical, very special to take, like, my design thinking and my knowledge of tattoos and skin and biology and collaborate with someone in terms of something sentimental or something representative of whatever idea they have, and just kind of, like, melding those 2 minds together, and then the end result is, what I always referred to as a spiritual dance conveyed on the
Yeah.
body's skin, And I love that you have tattoos as well, so I wanted to ask you what your thoughts are on the medium, but also which of your tattoos is your favorite, if you have one?
Well, I do. Uh, so I started getting little piecemeal ones in law school and stuff like that, and was totally addicted. And I have both of my arms are all the way covered, and my one, I guess you'd call it a calf, all the way up to the knee is covered on one side. Um, and it's about time for more. I haven't done it in about 5 years just because my daughter came along. I just got busy. Um, but I have lots. I have Where the Wild Things Are. I have two of those on my arms, and I love those. But you talk about collaboration. The tattoo artist I've gone to most is Liz Cook, who is at Rebel Muse in Louisville and here in Texas, and she's just amazing. And uh, she did I came in for a consultation on my leg, and I was like, I want to cover the whole, ankle to knee. And she said, what do you want? I was like, I don't know, something metal, just whatever. And because I do have some tattoos on me that I drew, and I could care less about them. It's so funny because I thought that was the way to really appreciate them early on when I first started getting them. And people come to me and they say, "Can you draw me a tattoo?" And I'm like, "I can, but I don't want to,
Yeah,
because what you really want to do is you want to find a tattoo, because there's a second word there, artist. You want to find a tattoo artist. They don't just put the ink on, they're artists. What you really want to do is not have me draw you a design that they put on, because rarely does that go well,
yeah.
because they don't care. I wouldn't care if I was a tattoo artist and I was putting it on and be like, okay, I'd do my best, but you're not passionate about it. It's not your
No.
art.
It's like a tattoo
Um,
artist is never a factory. They're not like a tattoo factory.
right.
They're a person, and they need to be involved in the creative process in order to be
Well,
in order for it to be the best fulfillment of both people's visions.
right. And so I very, very rarely now, I used to do little commissions for just a little bit of money to draw people stuff. And now what I tell them is I say, you are free to use any of my art you find, but I but I'm not going to draw you something. If you want something specific, you need to find an artist you like and you need to go to them and have them design it. Because the tattoos I really like that are on me are the ones that were designed by tattoo artists. And so my favorite piece is the one on my leg, which took the longest and was the only time I've ever been like, I'm fucking done with this, because she was in my knee pit
Oh yeah.
on the back of
Oh
my knee. And I
yeah.
was, and she was there for a long time. And I was like, I can't believe I'm really thinking about like stopping this, because it was the worst pain. But it's a huntress, this gorgeous huntress with like some like tribal looking face paint, and she's got a musk ox head on, and she's got a big glove with a like vulture with a skull head. And so she's like the huntress for the dead, and it looks so cool. I can send you the
You
link. There's
please need to send me a link or a
she's
photo
got
of this.
she's I'm gonna write myself a little note here. I'll send it to you as soon as we're done.
Okay.
It's all over the internet because she's pretty well known around here. She was on a TV show here for a little bit, so but she was already like pretty well known.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know completely about your knee pit because it's like I have this tattoo that a
Oh
friend of
yeah,
mine
yeah,
did
yeah.
here in Quito, and the closer it gets to the armpit, I'm just like, oh, baby, I am done. But then this friend of mine also did one on my stomach. That is
Oh no.
a fear. It's like a fear and loathing in Las Vegas
Uh-huh.
tattoo.
Oh, cool.
I love that book and I love that movie. And that was horrible. I'll show you after we're finished recording because it
Yeah,
was
no
like,
doubt.
oh, he clipped my ribs, and I'm just like, fuck me.
See, I haven't done any of that. I have something on my back, some bullshit that I got like in law school. It's bullshit. It's not a tramp stamp, okay? Thank God. But and then Liz also did my arm, and I was like flaming skulls. I was like, I just want flaming skulls. So it's like they're big, like big flaming skulls and flowers that go all the way up. There's my little wild thing where the wild things are guy, and then another artist kind of there's kind of a big piece there. But anyway, the color,
Beautiful.
this is probably 6 years old and it's really bright. So she uses Eternal ink. I don't know if that matters to you, but
Eternal Ink
that's
is
the brand.
it's consistent. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's
Oh
super
man.
cool. You did it. So when did you stop doing that when you had your child?
It was kind of this weird confluence of my wife being pregnant, the pandemic started, and uh, Ecuador went into shutdown, and I had to
Mm,
shut down my tattoo studio.
yeah. I'm sorry.
Um,
That's terrible.
no, it's okay. I mean, everything happens for a reason, and it's like my son was born, and I'm so happy that I get to be a stay-at-home dad for
Yeah.
him. But at the same time, it's like my creative endeavors have sort of shifted in the sense that I am still drawing. Was out of it for a while, but I'm starting to get back into it for sure.
Good.
But then I started writing more my own fiction, book that I'm
Brilliant.
currently working on, as well as podcasting, and I absolutely love it. And this is the quintessential situation where it's like I get to meet someone who is creative and interesting, and we get to have a conversation and just kind of like pick each
Right.
other's brains a little bit. And for me, that is so satisfying. So,
Yeah, me too. Me too. Especially in a solitary kind of situation, not only pandemic, but just like if you're writing or if you're
mhm.
doing stay at home dad, you could talk to the kid, the 19-month-old about,
Yeah.
different things.
If I talk to him about my book, he'd just like gloss over and be like, I'm just gonna walk away and get distracted by something else
Yeah.
because I don't know
Yeah.
what you're saying, Dad. And it's like he's babbling and there are some words coming out and the intention is there, but it's like we can't have a conversation just yet. But I also
Right.
can't necessarily talk to you about my book because there's some very non-PG things in there.
Yeah, right,
So.
right, right.
Cool, man. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. Do you have any of your future plans, any future books, what you're currently working on that you could share a little bit of some tidbits with everyone? And after that, if you could share with viewers and listeners what you're currently reading or watching or listening to.
Yeah, okay. So I'm actually the book I'm currently revising, the one that I've written 3 times, is a fantasy. It's a dark fantasy. Which is hard. Fantasy is fun. I was at Worldcon and I went to a panel that Wesley Chu was on. He's put some books out with Angry Robot, and he's typically a science fiction writer, but he's writing a fantasy, and he said it's so much harder because even science fiction, I grappled with some really really difficult subjects with stringers to try to build a world that was plausible, cohesive, made sense, and was awesome. Um, and and that was hard and challenging, but building an entire second world um, is is harder. And I think it's not harder because you have to build things from scratch necessarily. I think it's harder because you have to build it for yourself first, and then you have to rebuild it for the reader.
Yeah.
And and so my first 2 attempts at writing it were to learn that lesson. That because there was something wrong with it both times, and I kind of knew it. There was a lot wrong with it, but one of the things that was wrong with it was I had built this world that was like, it wasn't, I wouldn't call it super info dumpy, but I was just constantly explaining things. And I'm like, I don't write like this. Why am I explaining things all the time? And it was because I was building the world for myself. And once I had built it 2 times, I now am building it the 3rd time. I know what I need to include and what I can leave out, and the inferences that I can leave on the table. And frankly, it's no different than art. You know this as well as any artist, which is visual mixing is far more powerful than putting the color or the texture right on the canvas. If you can suggest it, it's much more powerful in the viewer's mind's eye than it will ever be on the page. And writing's the exact same. So, but I had to learn that. I kind of knew it, but I had never done it with fantasy, and so I really had to peel back a lot and pull back a lot and just put in what was essential. Even though I'm a fairly spare writer, just as my nature, I don't sit there and use 50 adjectives for every object. I wasn't doing that, but I was like this and then this and this, and I was building the bridge. When really what you kind of want to do is build the bridge so you know what the bridge looks like, and then
Cut the
give
bridge
the
in
reader
half.
give the reader a rope and let him swing across the gorge.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
kind of what you want to do. So that book is a fantasy. It's super weird. But I think it's a lot of fun. And if it is successful as a story, I think people will really enjoy it. It's basically turns out that there are angels, but they're just another species from another dimension, and they're harvesting a very important resource from human beings. So
Cool.
that's the that's the 2 sentences on
They're
that.
harvesting our faith.
Hmm.
Don't spoil
Yeah,
anything.
I mean,
It's okay.
yeah, I mean, so and it was funny because it was my daughter asked me one day why churches have steeples, and I was like, I don't know. I'm not super religious. I was raised Catholic, but I didn't learn why churches have steeples when I was raised, and I was like, well, maybe it's to attract an angel. I don't know. And so I started to think about that. I was like, that's kind of an interesting concept if there was a symbiotic thing. And then when I ended up writing the story, it became very not symbiotic, but a compelling premise that sounds on the surface kind of goofy, but I think it works now. But we'll see. We'll see if it works. We'll see what my agent thinks when she
Yeah.
sees
Oh man.
it.
Well, hopefully it comes to light because I'm excited to read that. I mean, just after reading
Yeah.
your 2 books, I'm like, yeah, this dude gets me in terms of like just weird wavelengths kind of thing.
Hey, well, let me thank you for reading my books. I mean, that
My
means a
pleasure.
whole lot. Not just reading the one that's coming out, but reading both of them. That means a lot. A reading is a big investment. You're talking 8 or so hours a book. So I totally appreciate that, especially with a young child. So that
Oh,
means a
dude,
lot.
it's
Thank you.
my pleasure. And on your end, what are you currently reading, watching, or listening to?
Okay, so I'm listening to a lot of Skeleton Witch. I've always liked
Awesome metal
Skeleton
band name.
Witch. Yep. I mean, seriously, it's like I see names sometime, and I'm like, what? I need to use that name. So good. Well, and there's a lot of bands that use witch in their name, and like probably my favorite as far as just how it sounds is there's a band in Seattle. I actually did an album cover for them that hasn't come out yet, and they're called Witch Ripper,
Oh my god.
and it's like stoner metal, but it's better than just stoner metal. They're great. I love them. Witch Ripper. So I'm listening to that. I'm listening to some Jonathan Holtan, who's I think he's either Finnish or Swedish. Oh shit, or Norwegian. I listen to so many like black metal bands, and
And they
they
all
all
come from
cross over.
Scandinavia.
They all come from there. But and he plays in a band called Tribulation, but he's got a he's got a solo project where it's just him and acoustic guitar, and it's just amazing. And the guy's voice sounds just like Gordon Lightfoot. I don't know if you know Gordon
Wow, yeah, I
Lightfoot,
do. Dude.
which is really funny. So it's like metal themed and like heavy, really cool stuff, really melodic, but the guy's voice is Gordon Lightfoot. And then Crypta. Crypta is a band from, I think they are from Brazil. It's an all-female band, and it's old school death metal.
Do they
They
sing in
are
Portuguese?
no.
Okay.
I don't know. Well, okay. I'm not going to say no. Their first album that came out is in English, as best I can tell, because it's metal voice, right? But I'm pretty sure it's metal voice, and it's absolutely amazing. It's so amazing. It's so good. And yeah, and it's got one of the members I think is Dutch, but the rest are Brazilian, and they absolutely shred. And then let's do something not metal. Is there anything not metal? Yes, there is. Agnes Obel. I love Agnes Obel. She's she from like the Netherlands or something. Anyway, beautiful, beautiful, very, I mean, amazing voice. I love her. And one more, Leah Ices, who's like kind of indie anyway. So I think everything is metal, frankly, because if you listen to lyrics of just about anything, I think metal is a state of mind. Um,
That's a
and
quote to end
so,
on. Metal is a
right?
state of mind, man.
It really is, because I listen to a lot of stuff that's like doesn't sound metal at all, and I'm like, those lyrics are metal. I'm sorry. And Ghost, I'm listening to a shitload of Ghost. Ghost is just one of my favorites for the last 5 or 6 years.
You got to send me some links, man. But
I will. I'll give you some of these
I'll share. I'll
names.
share it with my brother-in-law when he comes to visit as well, because he is a big metalhead. Just
Oh,
this like
great.
lanky Ecuadorian who loves metal, and I fucking love it. So
That's, I did an album cover. I haven't done Ecuador, but I've done an album cover for a Brazilian band called Dynahead, and I did one for a Guatemalan band called Anti-Science. So, I mean, metal's everywhere. It transcends
yeah,
everything. That's what I love about metal.
yeah. It's like you come to South America and you find reggaeton and metal,
Hmm.
and I'm just like, okay,
Yeah.
that's cool. And indie rock
Yeah.
too. Indie rock slips in there quite a lot.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Chris, I really appreciate you taking the time today, man. It was a pleasure to meet you and hang out. So thank you so much. If you could share with viewers and listeners where they can find you on social media and where they can pick up the Phlebotomist and Stringers.
Sure. So both books are everywhere, wherever books are sold. Barnes and Noble, or you could do bookshop.org, or you can do Amazon, of course, but they're really everywhere. Stringers is out April 12th. And I am fairly ubiquitous online. Chris J. Panatier, at Chris J. Panatier at Twitter, and Chris Panatier on Instagram, and chrispanatier.com online. And there's links to everything on chrispanatier.com. So that one's pretty easy.
Cool. Fantastic. But thank you so much for taking the time today, Chris. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Adrian. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun to chat.